All right, so before we start, this is going to be a bit of a blast from the past, but I got this comment about one of our old episodes that I thought I'd bring up because I don't know, it's kind of funny in general. You remember the show My Mother the Car?
Oh, yes.
Famously god awful sitcom where a guy's mother's spirit gets put into a car, and of course, no one knows except him. But I don't know. I was going to say she helps him with his family problems, but I think she actually just nags him and makes him insane. But anyway, terrible show. But this guy left a comment about that show, and I'll mention too his username is Jeffersonian Ideal, which I just think is maybe that'll explain what this comment's going to be like, because the Jeffersonian era was from 1801 to 1825. So that's what this guy decided to name himself after. So I'm going to read this comment in the accent that I feel is appropriate to the Jeffersonian ideal. Regarding My Mother the Car, which again, let me reiterate, is just the dumbest show that has maybe ever been made. It is essential to understand that the mid-1960s represent, in many ways, the peak of America's love affair with the automobile. The car had become more than just utilitarian. It was now considered by many to be a member of their family. Following World War II, the post-war U.S. economy was booming. The national interstate highway system began. Everyone wanted a new car. During the 1950s, automobiles were ostentatious spectacles. Beginning in the early 1960s, however, cars began to emulate works of art. Start listing famous TV and movie cars prior to 1960. The list is sparse. After 1960, there was hardly a popular television program that didn't feature a custom or select make and model of automobile. My Mother the Car may have been indented as a parody of popular fantasy television shows, according to one of the show's creators, Alan Burns, but an argument can be made for the show's homage to America's fascination and fanaticism with cars.
I like it.
And I was just like, yeah, sure. I mean, he's not wrong, but I just feel like he's really sidestepping the issue. That it's like, yeah, be that as it may, though, this is the stupidest TV show I've ever seen in my whole life.
Yeah. Forget the TV show, though. He has made some wonderful points about cars. I agree 100% because I've been thinking about this lately. The cars that you see on the road now, they all look alike. It doesn't matter. Somebody I know just bought a brand new Subaru. Well, there's nothing that distinguishes it from a Ford or I don't know. I can't even think of the names of them because they all look alike. They've all get that kind of slope to them and a little slant in the back window. And I've been looking at cars lately. I don't know why, but yeah, there's like about four designs out there, and they all copy one another. And it doesn't matter what kind it was. But in the 1950s and the 1960s, if you bought like a Chev or a Ford, or later on when the Japanese cars came in, the Nissans and the Toyotas, they looked different. And you could tell by looking right at, oh yeah, that is a Plymouth or that is a Rambler but now you can't. They all to me they all look alike. So he's right. The 1950s and the 1960s, they were the era of the car. And it was when you had one, it was special. Had a special look. And now they're just all cookie cutter. So well said, Guy. And he does open up by saying, My Mother the Car was a pretty shitty show, which it was. Which it was. But his comments on cars, beautiful. Love it.
Yeah, I guess I'm being a little tough on him just because it's just that his tone is so incongruous with such a dumb show. But I mean, I guess that is what's kind of neat is that it doesn't really matter what the conduit is to start these conversations, even if it's something as dumb as My Mother the Car. Yeah, 'cause it still brings up interesting things about the era.
And he mentions TV shows too that were pretty high caliber in the 1960s. Really high caliber. Good scenery, good acting, lots of scene changes, good plot lines. A whole lot of what's on there now. There are some good stuff. There's good stuff on. Mostly it's on Netflix in those places, though it's not on regular TV. Because again, later they just kind of cheapened out and they got down to like a lot of the shows are just set on a stage, one scene. So yeah, I think maybe I'd agree. The late 50s and the early 60s, the high point for some TV viewing and Cars. Well said.
Yeah, I think that one, it cracked me up too, just because, we did that episode ages ago. I haven't thought about that show in forever. No one has commented on that episode in some time. And yeah, I just woke up and I got the little notification that there was a comment. And I guess I'm like bleary eyed. First thing of the day, I read that comment and I was like, what the hell is this encyclopedia entry? Where did this come from?
Well, I love it.
As far as the way cars all look the same, though, my favorite quote about that was that comic book Sin City. The guy in Sin City, Marv, that's one of his quotes. It's like, cars these days, they all look like electric shavers. I always thought that was kind of good. However, this is probably annoying anyone who clicked on this episode looking for us to talk about the show Tokyo Vice, because what we're going to watch this episode has nothing at all to do with My Mother the Car in any way. It's a show called Tokyo Vice. So I'll tell you how I came across this. This is a show, I'd never heard of it. It's a HBO show from pretty recently, 2022. It's based on a memoir a guy wrote in 2009. This guy, Jake Adelstein, he was an American journalist, and he was one of the first Americans to investigate stuff about like the Yakuza and organized crime in Tokyo. And apparently he had connections with the police department, and he actually helped out with this type of stuff. So it's basically based on a true story. But why I heard about this is that, again, HBO, they tend to not cut corners. They try to do as well as they can. But apparently it's really, really hard to film in Japan. Very few shows are actually filmed in Japan or movies because trying to get the rights to film is virtually impossible. So this show, apparently it's like unprecedented, the stuff that they did. The example I heard, the headline that made me aware of this show is there's this neighborhood called Akasaka that has never been in a movie or on a TV show ever because no one has ever gotten the rights to film there. This is the first show that ever did. And in order to do that, they approached the local police department. And the police department said, we will only consider this. We won't even okay it. We'll just only consider it if you go around to all 300 businesses in this neighborhood and you get every single one of them to agree. So they did. They went around to 300 places and got them to agree. And then they only got the rights to film on one day, and it almost rained that day. And the location manager said if it had rained, he would have just quit the business forever. It would have been the worst. But they pulled it off. So that's a cool headline. However, one of the reasons, now I'll tell you my personal experience with Akasaka, one of the reasons it's never been shown on TV is that it's boring as hell. That actual neighborhood is where the Canadian embassy is. So I'm unfortunately overly aware of that neighborhood because in 2019 I lost my passport. So I spent a lot of time there at the Canadian embassy sorting out stuff. And it's just a really boring businessy neighborhood. So I was curious about this show and I did want to check it out. But the headline thing of Akasaka, it's like, well, yeah, but those episodes, like that neighborhood is legitimately way boring. I don't care about that. So instead, I did grab another episode of this show. I got the third episode because they go to a neighborhood called Kabukicho, which is like the red light district of Japan. And it's, there's like this area called Golden Gai.
A little more exciting.
Yeah, and on my last trip to Japan just last year, I went there and I walked around in the afternoon and soaked it in. And then I went back in the evening. And man, it's a whole different story at night. It is like, this is the neighborhood where it's funny because Japan is so homogenous, like everyone is Asian. So if you're not Asian, you really stand out. So what famously happens in this neighborhood is there's these touts, that are trying to get you to come into their bar. And there's stories of people getting drugged and getting, their credit cards run up and these bad things happening. However, the people involved in this, and it sounds, like to our North American eyes, this sounds like a terribly racist thing to say, but when everybody is Asian, you can really see these patterns. Clearly, it's guys from Africa. It's African guys who come into Japan and they open these bars or they get involved in the bars. And I saw that firsthand when I came back at night. I've never seen so many African dudes or dark-skinned people in Japan in my fucking life. And they were all like, hey, buddy, hey, dude, come on in. You want to come to my bar? And it's like, and it's such a problem that they literally drive around with loudspeakers, and the loudspeakers. Yeah, like imagine if you're the African guy running your shady business, and somebody and it's double weird because it's in broken English. It's this recorded message, but it's in broken English saying, "Do not follow the touts. You will be ripped off. Please check the internet." Like, and I'm like, this is like the craziest shit in the world. But it's so weird that you can like just that it's so prescribed, you know? It's like, all right, there's the Asian people that are the locals that live here. There's the black dudes that are trying to rip off the tourists, and then there's the tourists who all look like me. It was all nerdy white people. And it's just like, this is the weirdest neighborhood I've ever been in. So there's one episode of this show where they film there. And like there's this sub neighborhood in there called Golden Guy where there's these little back alleys and there's like 200 little tiny bars. It is a legitimately cool neighborhood. So I thought this could be interesting to watch just because it's an HBO crime show set in Japan. It's probably a pretty good show anyway. Sounds like kind of an interesting thing. And that they film in these places that no one has ever filmed before. However, I did do a quick little check through, and the amount of time that they film outside, obviously because it is so difficult, is very small. They actually spend a very small amount of time outside. So I don't know. I don't know. This might not be that interesting, or it might be. I don't know. Like the reason why I gravitated to this show is like a tiny little 5% of the show, and the rest is just going to be inside as a crime drama. So, but I'm like, I don't know. How bad could it be? It's a good excuse, I guess, just to check it out. And yeah, I just thought I could tell you about that neighborhood because it is one of the weirdest neighborhoods I've ever been in my whole life.
But this is a Japanese-made production, right?
I don't believe so. It's HBO, so it is American made, but obviously in great tandem with Japan. But I think technically it's an American production.
Okay.
So yeah, and again, it's a little weird too because we're not watching the first episode; we're watching the third episode. But I figure, we'll probably get the basics pretty easy. American reporter trying to work with the police, trying to infiltrate and learn about the Japanese underworld of the Yakuza. And I believe the time it's set in 1999. So, and yeah, it's roughly a true story about this guy.
All right, well, let's check it out then. Let's see what it is. Didn't do a thing for me.
Yep, it is. Yeah, it was definitely, what's the way to put it? Like, just drawn in by the headlines. It was such a neat idea of, the amount of work they put into being able to film in Tokyo. But yeah, that feels like an extremely by the books police show where, just the fact that it's set in Japan certainly is not enough to, like, as we were saying when we were watching it, that if you just kind of transposed it onto Chicago or something and it was just the mafia, like, I feel like this is probably not... Wow, I just saw Quebec float by there. I don't know what Quebec had to do with it, but anyway, like, I don't know that this reflects on the guy's book at all. It's a very interesting concept and an interesting life the guy seems to have led, but the book presumably would be a lot different. Because, like, when we were watching all those super tropey, mega cliched Yakuza parts, I was just thinking, like, well, this wouldn't even have been in the book. The book was about a reporter. From his perspective, he doesn't know what the Yakuza is up to, so that's just the HBO writers writing some stuff. And same thing with the lady who's in it, the love interest character. Like, they're all those scenes like could have been written by an AI or something. Like, they're just the same scene that you've seen a million times.
Probably would have been more interesting if it had been written by an AI.
Yeah, maybe it would have taken a weird twist. And I think my favorite part was just... the relationship between him and Ken Watanabe, the grizzled old police officer. But again, that if anything, that might be the most tropey part. Like, that is a thing I've seen a million times over in a million different shows. It's just, it is just an interesting idea. But yeah, nothing about this show stands out in particular. And I guess this would be the time to bring up, I didn't mention this at the outset because, I didn't want to go in negatively. But this show has been canceled.
No loss. No loss.
Yeah, so it only started in 2022 and it's already over. So I can't say that anything about it particularly drew me in.
Like usually you get to the end of these shows and okay, so he's been picked up by the bad guys and taken off. But usually there's such a high point that you say, oh my God, I got to see what happens. But nothing. I don't care what happens to this guy. I don't care. They can go shoot him. He can get away. I don't care. It just didn't, there was nothing in it that made me care enough about anybody in it, even the main character. I just don't care.
Yeah, and I think this could be a thing too of TV. It really had that feeling of if this was a movie, then maybe they would have focused a little more on the core conceit that the book was no doubt about this guy integrating himself into Japan. Instead, he was just kind of a side character. He showed up once in a while. And yeah, he wasn't fantastically interesting in the first place. But yeah, you can really just feel that undertow feeling of like, all right, let's have a scene with the Yakuza. Let's have a scene with the lady. Let's have a scene over here. Let's have a scene over there. Let's drag this out. We got to fill time. Drag it out, boys. And it's like, yeah, not a very inspiring first watch, that's for sure.
And even boring things like the girls in the shop looking at the expensive dresses. And like, who cares? Who cared whether they thought the dresses were too expensive? Who cares whether they're sluts or whores? I mean, that's the impression that you should get. And evil guys in it, I don't know. I didn't find them evil enough. Yeah, they're bad guys. There's no question, but they're not real bad guys that you're really afraid of and you really hope they get their comeuppance. Yeah, it's like, yeah, whatever. They're just another one of those run-of-the-mill bad guys.
Yeah, I really would like to. I just had this. It's funny because it's a completely different type of thing. But yesterday I went to see, they made a new Beetlejuice movie after 30 years. And when I was a little kid, Beetlejuice was my favorite movie. And it's still.
Yeah, I heard that was out.
And the original I rewatched, and it still is amazing. It's such a good movie. But the new one, the exact thought I had coming out of it was I wish I could have gone through the script with a red pen and just try to write down, like, so where's the part where I'm supposed to care? What's the character I'm supposed to care about? What's the event I'm supposed to care about? And even though obviously a cop procedural set in Tokyo is nothing like a Beetlejuice movie, but I have that same feeling. I'd love to just go through it, like a teacher who's shaming their students for lack of effort. Just mark it up with so many red marks of like, where am I supposed to care? Now go home and like rub their nose in it. Like, you did a bad job. What is this? However, I guess in the way that we used My Mother the Car to just yammer about other stuff, I did think of a couple little anecdotes that are just an excuse to talk about them based on this show. One of them is this show being set in 1999. Apparently, the organized crime problem in Japan was much worse even that recently ago, because it made me think of an anecdote. This guy, Quinlan, his name is, his YouTube channel is called Go North Japan, and he's like a tour guide. He's from Wisconsin or something, but he lives in northern Japan, and he'll take you on mountain hikes and stuff. He's lived there for 20 years. But he said when he first moved to Japan, he lived in northern Tokyo in this area called Ikebukuro that I've hung out in a bunch, and I love Ikebukuro. It's super fun. But even as recently as like 25 years ago, it was so much worse that he said one morning he was out having a walk and there was a guy in a fancy suit, clearly a Yakuza guy, covered in blood in a phone booth calling someone. And he's just like, fuck, I better go the other way. Like, I don't know what this story is here. But yeah, that was only, again, like around the turn of the century, and you just bloody guys in phone booths were popping up in northern Tokyo. So that's kind of interesting. In fact, it's a shame that didn't happen in this episode. That would have been more interesting. But the other thing that made me think of is as far as the difficulty of filming in Japan, because they still were only outside for very small bits, is that movie Lost in Translation, the movie with Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson that holds up pretty well. Very entertaining Japan movie. But that movie is all over the place in Tokyo. And that is obviously unusual. I can't think of another movie quite like that. So I looked that up. Like, how did they pull that off? And how they pulled it off is they didn't ask anybody. They just had a small crew and they filmed illegally like crazy. So that was back in 2003. I don't know if you can still get away with that. But I just thought that's interesting that, what's that saying? Like, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. I don't think that's a good tact to take in Japan, because they don't fuck around in Japan. They're happy to deport you with no no due cause and no proper legal systems. They'll just, you don't want to fuck with the police in Japan. But if you do, you get to make Lost in Translation, one of the most beautiful films set in Tokyo ever. But yeah, that's how they did it.
Well, for all the outdoor scenes that they had here, they just could have gone around with a video cam and filmed like from a distance, back, street scenes in Japan, and nobody would have been the wiser as to what they were doing. The actual filming of the people in the street, they could have done that anywhere. They could have set that up on a sound stage somewhere, and done it, because it didn't add anything. I don't feel it added anything to this show for them to be filming a little bit out on the street. I mean, they showed like what? I don't know. I don't even remember what they showed. It was just so boring. Yeah, they didn't need to run into problems with the. I suppose if you were in Japan, like, you recognize the corner that they had filmed at, but big deal. Most other people wouldn't have recognized that. That could have been anywhere. They could have just taken a picture of it and recreated it somewhere.
Yeah, and that's where I thought it was. That's why, even though the initial headline I read was about the Akasaka neighborhood and how notable it was that they got all those 300 signatures, but that I still couldn't bring myself to even get one of those episodes, because if you thought this was uneventful street stuff, like, that neighborhood really is, like, just imagine the neighborhood that the Canadian embassy would be in, the most boring business neighborhood of all time. That's all it is. So, yeah, it would have been even, like, yeah, definitely. I hate to spit on the grave of a show that's already been canceled, but yeah, not worth the effort, guys. Not worth it.
Well, I'll spit on it. There.
So then one thing I thought we could end with, just because that's one of the weird ironies too, is all of this talk about getting filming permits and how difficult it was and whatnot. The irony is that they're living in the old world with any of this talk. They're living in the world of TV networks, like, it's not that world anymore. Who cares if you have a film crew? Who needs it? Because the reality is, you can see all of this stuff. You can see the Akasaka neighborhood. You can see Golden Gai. You can see Kabukicho. You can see any neighborhood you want just by going on YouTube and typing in the name, because everybody has a camera in their phone nowadays. So there's just like literally thousands of videos of people walking around every conceivable neighborhood of Japan at every time of day in every kind of weather. So instead of these little tiny glimpses of Kabukicho, I just grabbed off YouTube a couple of minutes of just a person walking around the neighborhood. So my initial thing that is like, oh, I can show you this cool neighborhood, and it didn't really work out. But I can just show you through this YouTube clip, and it's way better for those purposes. You literally get to see what this cool neighborhood looks like with 200 little bars and all these back alleys. So yeah, this is the actual part of Kabukicho, the Golden Gai part, where it's like these little narrow alleyways, and there's something like 200 bars here. And the way it works is, you'll see when the camera shows inside some of these bars that there's only space for like a few people. There's like enough chairs for like 4 to 6 people in each bar.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of famous for just these teeny little places. So this is a good example, I guess, of I don't know how you could realistically film a TV show here, because, yeah, to get these places to shut down while you bring in your whole big film crew, like, no one's going to bother. But this is what's kind of neat, is you can just circumvent all that stuff with just YouTube. This is just some random channel.
And even then, if there weren't all these things packed in the alley, you might have enough space for a small car to drive down there, but not with all that gear in there.
Yeah, that's one thing that's neat about this, is like, this wouldn't even pass fire codes in North America. Like, you could never do this, And it really is like so neat, like just walking through the little twisty alleys. I didn't actually go in any of the bars because I'm just, I was traveling by myself, so it was a little awkward anyway. But apparently, like, they all kind of work different, but usually you go in and you pay a certain amount just to sit down, and then, some of them are very friendly to foreigners, and some of them are like not so much. And but I don't know, it's just a really neat little place, just a cool place. So this was kind of what was on my mind with that episode of the TV show. But of course, the TV show never really, it showed them sitting at a bar for a bit, but that was it. And this stuff's all over YouTube. If you want to just experience what it's like to walk around Japan, you totally can. But if you want to bring a film crew with you, you totally can't.